Tonight, I just want to say that we are fortunate to have David A. Kelly Jr., JD, here to speak to us tonight. It's on a subject that is quite interesting. I've never heard anything on this before, so I'm looking forward to it. David has a JD, Texas Tech University School of Law, an MBA from National University, and a BSc University of Pennsylvania, Mechanical Engineering and Applied Mechanics. How did you get from there to law? You'll have to tell me that.
The better part is I'm working on my history PhD.
Oh, now we're working on our history PhD. Wow.
I'm really assuming you.
Okay.
Someday I'll know what I want to do when I grow up.
When you grow up, yes. Well, tonight David is going to be talking to us about defending Wirtz. It's something that really, if you stop, most people never give this a thought. We all knew that his ending was pretty fast and furious, and for the fact that he was tried, but never gave it any thought, really. Just knew that he deserved it. Good luck to him, and that's the end of it. However, tonight we're going to find out what the law firm of Hughes, Denver, and Peck had to say about it. And I'm not going to talk anymore. David, come on in and go to it.
Thanks. Good evening. First of all, I just want to say I presented to this group. This is my third time, but the last two times were via Zoom. And as great as Zoom is, I mean, it kept us going during the pandemic. It is much more exciting, I think, to be live and actually meeting people and talking to them and getting some face-to-face time. And also, I couldn't say no to visiting this building. I looked it up on the website and I said, nah, I'm going there. There's just no way I can miss that. So tonight, what I want to do is talk about part of the trial of Henry Wirtz, the commandant of the prisoner of war camp known as Andersonville, and the law firm that first represented him at what we would today call the war crimes trial. I am Dave Kelly, a member of the Rhode Island Civil War Roundtable, and I would like to call myself a lifelong learner of the Civil War. I don't consider myself a scholar because I'm still learning. For my day job, I am a member of the faculty at the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. So before I continue, I have to give this disclaimer. This presentation was prepared by me in my personal capacity. The opinions expressed here are my own and do not reflect the views of the United States Naval War College, the Department of the Navy, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. Okay, so let's get started. Andersonville, what a great place. Camp Sumter, which is better known as Andersonville, was situated near the town of Andersonville in Sumter County, Georgia. Built in 1864 to alleviate the huge number of prisoners being hosted in and around Richmond, it received its first prisoners in February 1864. It quickly became flooded, you can see, as increased number of prisoners arrived from all directions, and in part because of the breakdown of the prisoner exchange system. Now, those of you who may have heard some stuff about Andersonville, let me just point out, these are the sinks, the latrines. Notice how close it is to where people are living. This stream is where they got their drinking water. So what fun that would have been. And the other thing we hear about is the deadline. And it's this right here, that's a bunch of poles, about 4 feet off the ground. It's one of those things where it's a way to stop prisoners from escaping or rushing the gate. Anybody who crosses it was shot. While Andersonville does get a lot of publicity for deadline, northern prisoner war camps had those also. This is the cemetery in Andersonville. Over the next year and a couple of months, 45,000 POWs would enter the camp. At one time, 33,000 were present in a camp designed to hold 10,000. But this made the prison the 5th largest city in the Confederacy. Approximately 13,000 of those who entered, represented here, would die from a number of maladies. News of the conditions there swept throughout the North. Northerners became convinced, government, military, civilians, that the forward conditions were purposely imposed for the specific purpose of killing Union soldiers. In 1864, a report by the United States Sanitary Commission, a private relief agency created by federal legislation, asserted that the prisoners were subjected to, I get the right quote here, a process as certain as poison, and that the suffering was, quote, designedly inflicted by the military and other authority of the rebel government, and not due to causes which such authorities could not control. So it's not surprising that when Union forces captured Andersonville, Captain Henry Wirtz, the commandant, was arrested, sent to Washington, D.C., and imprisoned to await trial. As a side note, it's interesting to note that he was arrested and escorted to Washington by Captain Henry Noyes. Anybody? Okay. Henry Noyes was a young officer in the Union Army who would later retire as a full colonel in 1901. His ancestors were the same Noyes that were clergymen involved in the Salem witch trials. And they could count as distant relatives Nathan Hale and the founder of the Oneida community in New York, as well as the Oneida Silverware Company. One of the earliest Noyes houses is still standing, and I'm not quite sure, but I think it's in Newbury. My geography is bad. I don't know how far that is from here, but I believe it's outside Boston or near Cape Cod.
45 minutes away.
So that's 3 miles.
3 miles?
3 miles. That's how long it took.
Newbury Port?
Oh, it took me 45 minutes to go the last 8 miles to get here. So what do we know of Wirtz's trial and what his defense was during it? How many saw Ken Burns' Civil War? How about when it first came out in 1990? This was the first time I had heard of Andersonville, Henry Wirtz, and his trial. Near the end of the final episode, Ken Burns stated, without much explanation, that Wirtz had pleaded he had only followed orders. But did he? My next encounter with Andersonville was in 1996 when I watched the Ted Turner produced, John Frankenheimer directed movie, Andersonville. While the movie did not go into much into the trial of Wirtz after the war, it did a pretty good job of painting him to be a pretty bad guy. But the entertainment industry did not use the trial of Wirtz as a subject in these two productions. However, in 1959, the Wirtz trial was subject of a play written by Saul Levitt, a World War II soldier who served in B-17s until he was transferred to Yank magazine, where he visited the Ohrdorf concentration camp right after its liberation. He wrote the screenplay. Interestingly, the part of Lieutenant Colonel Norton Shipman, the prosecutor, was played by George C. Scott. In this play, much is made of Wirtz arguing that he was only following orders. In 1970, the play was adapted for television and played as an episode of PBS series Hollywood Television Theater. George C. Scott was now the director, and starring were some familiar faces. Jack Cassidy, father of David and Sean, and was nominated for an Emmy for his role as Wirtz's defense counsel. Buddy Ebsen was one of the witnesses. And yeah, William Shatner played the role of the prosecutor, Norton Shipman. That's Norton Shipman. They look alike. In all these, a major theme was that Wirtz argued throughout he was only following orders as all good soldiers should. He had no choice. So back to the story. So Wirtz was arrested, transported to Washington, D.C., be put on trial, and he was housed in the old Capitol prison. After the war, during the War of 1812, when the Capitol was burned down, the Congress met in this building for a while. until the other buildings could be repaired. It's across the street from, pretty much across the street from the Capitol. And its location is spot on where the Supreme Court building is. See this building, the lower half is white. On the photo on the right, you can kind of see. You can kind of see this is the old Capitol, old Capitol prison. And that picture was taken from the top of the Capitol building. And then at Wirtz's execution, to look from the other direction, you can see where the Capitol is. It pretty much is right, the prison or the gallows is right on the patio, front patio of the Supreme Court building. And I went there just to get a feel for it. Do not go to the Capitol building right before a very politically charged hearing is happened with hair like this, torn jeans, and a Harley t-shirt. They will take notice. And I had to explain to the guy, showed him my map. They said, okay, he's just a dork. But anyway, so that's where the old Capitol prison is. And if you go there, it's amazing when you see what Washington, D.C. looked like then and what it looks like now, especially around the Capitol. There was people in the North more interested than others in Wirtz's trial. One of them was Secretary Edwin Stanton, and the other one, Judge Advocate General of the Army, Joseph Holt. They saw Wirtz as more than just a solitary malfeasor to be tried and punished. Both had been convinced that those who took part with John Wilkes Booth in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln were only the tip of the iceberg, and that leading Confederates, including Jefferson Davis, were part of a conspiracy. In the end, 8 defendants on the Lincoln assassination trial were brought to trial and prosecuted by Holt. The military commission trying them sentenced 4 to death. And while it could be seen as a facial victory for Holt, it wasn't, because he was unable to connect the assassination of Lincoln to any leading Confederates, which was his major goal. This was due in part to what could be called questionable courtroom tactics by the government to get a conviction, and somewhat dubious veracity of some of the witnesses. Because of this, Holt had to continue his efforts to connect Davis and other leading Confederates to criminal activity seen by many Northerners to be outrageous. For this, Holt turned to the upcoming Wirtz trial, where he designed a plan that would open Confederate leadership to future prosecution and sentencing while punishing Wirtz and satisfying the public's need for him to be punished. In late July 1865, the prosecution, led by Colonel Norton Shipman, finalized a multi-count charge against Wirtz. The first charge was an accusation that Wirtz had violated the laws of war, in that he willfully violated his duty to care for the prisoners in his custody, and that he pursued an evil design to impair and injure the health and destroy the lives of Union prisoners. To accomplish this, Wirtz was accused of herding 30,000 prisoners into, quote, unhealthy and unwholesome quarters in a close and small area of ground, wholly inadequate to their wants and destructive of their health. Remember, he's a captain. So he's being accused on his own of herding these 30,000 prisoners, which is 2 corps of soldiers. He was also told where he was also accused of intentionally depriving them of shelter, food, water, and medical attention. Quote, so that the armies of the United States might be weakened and impaired. He was also accused of ordering his soldiers to shoot and kill large numbers of prisoners, as well as killing and murdering many of them himself. Shipman saw the trial and conviction of Wirtz as a minor task, relatively small consequences, and the work of maybe a few days. But it would be the first step towards the trial and conviction of many high-ranking Confederates, including Jefferson Davis and members of his cabinet. While perhaps overkill, the number and breadth of the charges against Wirtz was not meant to overwhelm, but rather to induce him to implicate others in what Shipman and Holt were sure was a wide-ranging plot by Confederate authorities. The idea was pile on the charges and get Wirtz to say, it wasn't me, I was just told to do this. And then they can go after the big guns. Given that he was charged directly with doing bad things, if he were to pursue the "I was only following orders" defense, this would be the situation to do it in. It would probably be believed. I need to note that these were not the charges that Wirtz would eventually face at trial. They were the charges that the law firm representing him were served and used to prepare for his defense. So what defense was the firm preparing? To do that, there's not really concrete evidence. There's no document, no smoking gun. So just have to look at the events, the people, what was going on, and these are a series of maybes. I really kind of like them. They're more fun than just telling the story because I'll probably think about this all the way home tonight. I have been working on this subject for quite a few years. So let's look at the law firm of Hughes, Denver, and Peck, and see if that will help us understand how they would approach Wirtz's trial. The law firm of Hughes, Denver, and Peck, while those names mean not much now, is perhaps one of the most socially and politically connected law firms in Washington, D.C., and was setting up to begin what would turn out to be a very successful and lucrative practice in front of the federal court's claims. Why it would interrupt its work to defend the friendless, penniless, and foreign-born, that's a big thing back then, foreign-born Wirtz in what was certain to become a long, drawn-out case can perhaps be best understood by analyzing the lawyers who made up the firm. First one is James Denver, fascinating man, born in Winchester, Virginia, grew up in Ohio, and after serving in the Mexican War, migrated west, ending up in California. Recognizing opportunity during the California gold rush, he established a business supplying to the miners the materials that they would need to mine. So he was taking no risk in this thing, and that's a very shrewd business mind at the time. His success allowed him to make the move into politics, both at the local level and the state level. Upon the outbreak of the Civil War, Denver was appointed the general officer in the United States Army, in which he served for almost 2 years before resigning to attend to his far-flung business affairs. Moving to Washington, D.C., he was working to establish a partnership for the practice of law with an old business associate, Andrew Isaacs. Unfortunately, I've been unable to find a picture of Isaacs. Isaacs had been the first Attorney General of Kansas Territory in 1854 and was deeply involved in its development. In doing so, he orchestrated several highly controversial and even fraudulent land deals with the local Native American population, including at least one in which Denver had a financial stake. More importantly, during this time, Isaacs demonstrated his ability to put aside his political views, if doing so increased the probability of realizing profit. As the Civil War drew to a close, the two partners saw the Captured and Abandoned Property Act of 1863 as a means to profits. This law allowed loyal Southerners who had their property confiscated by the U.S. government during the war to sue in the Court of Claims for compensation. The Act's contingency fee provision and the various laws that for all practical purposes banned Southern lawyers from practicing in federal courts made the pursuit of these claims very attractive to profit-minded attorneys. And what attorney isn't profit-minded? To gain an insight into the workings of the Court of Claims, Isaac suggested adding James Hughes, who had resigned as a Court of Claims judge in December 1864 to the firm. Nearly 5 years' experience on the court, Hughes undoubtedly brought a wealth of knowledge to the firm concerning the workings and the personalities of those involved in the court. Hughes certainly shared his new partner's nose for profit, having participated in at least one scheme with Lincoln confidant Senator Orville Browning to transport cotton, tobacco, and other items out of the Confederacy during the war in order to sell them to Northern merchants and manufacturers. An enterprise that caused General Ulysses S. Grant to say that I am of the opinion that all permits issued to Judge Hughes should be canceled. I believe there's a deep laid plan for making millions, and they will sacrifice every interest for the country to succeed. Not the highest endorsement you can get. In May 1865, the Washington, D.C. papers started carrying advertisements for the law firm of Hughes, Isaacs, and Denver that specifically mentioned its representation of clients in front of the Court of Claims. The final member of the law firm, Charles Peck, was a last-minute addition, joining in June 1865 after the untimely death of Isaacs. While most likely a very competent attorney, what made him attractive to Hughes in Denver was that his father, Ebenezer Peck, was one of the founders of the Republican Party, and he was a sitting judge on the Court of Claims. Peck's name replaced Isaacs on their advertisements in the local newspapers, and the firm now had become second to none in connection to and knowledge of the form through which claims under the Captured and Abandoned Property Act had to be brought. Not surprisingly, Hughes and Peck appeared on behalf of the firm in cases before the court, Peck doing research work. Hughes, Denver, and Peck were highly successful, obtaining awards in 145 of 155 cases. However, the firm was subject, not surprisingly, to claims of bribing government officials, trying to dismiss certain appealed claims, concealed conflicts of interest, and a bunch of other bad acts. Although there was nothing ever concluded that they did, it just doesn't smell right. But the question remains, why would such a firm with all this potential income coming in defend this guy Wirtz? And what was its planned defense? There are perhaps three reasons why Hughes, Denver, and Peck would take on the defense of Wirtz. One of altruism, one from a marketing standpoint, and one purely monetary. While no evidence has been discovered pointing to one or the other, perhaps the decision to defend Wirtz was a combination of all three. Denver was very much against the use of military commissions. This is what they were going to try Wirtz under, same as the Lincoln assassinators. In letters to his wife, in which he discussed the commission that tried those tied to the Lincoln assassination, he made his opinion clear. Even though he felt that those involved in Lincoln's death ought to be punished, he felt that doing so should only follow a regular trial by a proper civil court. To do otherwise would be establishing a vigilante process that would work the same way as those unlawful organizations gotten sometimes to administer lynch law. Okay. Before the war, Denver spent quite a bit of time in California. He saw vigilante groups in action and the harm that they could cause. Denver had friends on the Lincoln Commission. And so he saw the similarities between Wirtz and the Lincoln assassinators and saw the same thing happening. But that by itself was probably not enough to convince his two partners to spend time, effort to defend Wirtz without any income. The firm was carefully constructed, though, to take advantage of the Captured and Abandoned Property Act. It brought in attorneys connected to the court in which those cases would be held. It would also be important to maintain some level of familiarity with potential clients, nearly all of whom would no doubt be well-heeled Southerners. Isaacs had all the right credentials. Living in Tennessee and Louisiana prior to moving to Kansas and Washington, the slave-owning Isaacs had been the darling of Southerners during what was called Bloody Kansas. He was proudly called a border ruffian. With his death, the firm was then made up of a Union general, Denver, a U.S. judge, Hughes, and the son of a man who was both a U.S. judge and founder of the Republican Party, Peck. Did the firm's members see the representation of Wirtz as a way to endear themselves to potential clients and perhaps avoid the carpetbagger label by showing its willingness to battle the federal government? Again, there is no concrete evidence, but it's just something to think about. The third possible reason to defend Wirtz was the connection that the Wirtz trial would have on the future prosecution of Jefferson Davis, who was being held captive in Fortress Monroe. The desire to link Davis and other high-ranking Confederates to the horrors of Andersonville was clear to many, especially after the disastrous attempt to do so during the trial of the Lincoln assassins. When Davis was first arrested and put in confinement, Charles O'Connor, a noted New York defense attorney with decidedly pro-Southern and pro-slavery sympathies, volunteered to defend him. In June 1865, the Confederate financial agent in Europe, Colin MacRae, engaged to have 10,000 pounds deposited in an account for O'Connor's use to defend Davis. When he realized that Wirtz's trial, if not, quote, properly managed, could assist the U.S. government in prosecuting Davis, MacRae authorized O'Connor to use part of the defense funds to, quote, see that Captain Wirtz has able counsel and that his case is so managed as not to damage those persons that may be here after trial. While no evidence has been uncovered that would indicate that Hughes, Denver, and Peck received remuneration in this way, it should be noted that very little documentation concerning the representation of Wirtz by Washington firm has been identified, and O'Connor was well known for respecting the privacy of his clients. The only documentation I can find from Hughes, Denver, and Peck about the Wirtz trial is when they basically told Wirtz would quit. You're on your own, bud, have fun. Other than that, the file, that was it. So I'm still searching for more stuff, but you look at it, this was a way. This guy in New York, the attorney, was being told, make sure Wirtz has got good defense. What's one of the best law firms in Washington, D.C.? Hughes, Denver, and Peck. He's got a lot of money. Whether or not that means something, I don't know. But it can see that each of these reasons may have impacted their decision to defend Wirtz. The superior orders defense. So let's talk about that. I was only following orders defense. What does that mean? And is it a viable defense in Wirtz's case? Something that a highly experienced and talented law firm would do. During the mid-1860s, the superior orders defense was a defense that did not deny a harmful act by a defendant. Yes, that act did happen, but instead argued that the defendant should not be held accountable because of a want or defect of will. And this was based on an old established idea that punishment is only inflicted for the abuse of that free will which God has given to man. Thus, a man should not be punished for those acts which are done through unavoidable force and compulsion. In other words, if there was no free will involved, then he should not be punished. Thus, a subordinate who committed an act not because he or she desired the end result, but rather in response to an order from a superior should not be punished. It should be noted at the time of the Civil War, though, the superior orders defense was not an absolute defense, but limited to those cases in which the order was not in itself so glaringly opposed to all law as to be apparent without reflection or consideration. to show you what that means is up until recently, the superior orders defense was something that an American soldier could use, depending on the circumstance. Fascinatingly, that was stricken from the doctrine, what it was called, in late 1944. So they were setting up to prosecute some of the Nazis and Japanese war criminals. So it's just interesting, that's when that was taken down. While perhaps this defense is attractive to a layman, we can all understand the, hey, I was only ordered to. Attorneys such as Hughes, Denver, and Peck surely saw the impossibility of succeeding with this defense. It was not enough for Wirtz to say, hey, I was only following orders. He would have to prove that such orders existed. Prosecutors' expectations aside, his attorneys had to know that producing evidence showing that orders were given covering the various acts he was accused of would be an impossible task. Even today, no written evidence that I could find or anyone else that would suggest that Wirtz or anyone else was ordered to eliminate prisoners on any scale. Added to that, Wirtz's attorneys in the weeks prior to trial seemed to indicate that they were not pursuing a superior orders defense. In a letter to his wife shortly before trial, Denver discussed the case, and he pointed out that his firm had received offers from, quote, quite a number of former prisoners to testify to Wirtz's good behavior and efforts on their behalf, and that if they prove what they say they will, he ought to be acquitted. While not conclusive, it would seem that if they were pursuing a superior orders defense, Wirtz's attorneys would be more interested in obtaining witnesses that were in Wirtz's inner circle or associated with those above him in the chain of command and could speak to what orders Wirtz did or did not receive. Also, in an attempt to sway public opinion from the growing tide of indignation towards their client, Wirtz's attorney sent a letter to the editors of the New York Evening Post. While perhaps not as successful as a public relations ploy, it is interesting, and they say in their defense would not, quote, extenuate or justify any of his actions, but rather exonerate Wirtz. They were saying flat out, we're not going to say that he was ordered to do something. We're going to say he didn't do any of these things. So it's kind of telling. Finally, the successful use of the superior orders defense would be disastrous for the firm. To make the assertion that a poor, low-ranking immigrant was not responsible for the deaths of thousands by arguing that this is what they could be doing, that the finest examples of Southern manhood ordered him to commit unspeakable acts would no doubt have alienated much of the firm's then current and future clients. The index of the firm's records show files for the wife of former Confederate Secretary of War James Seton, former Confederate Secretary of State Robert Hunter, and Confederate Naval Officer Raphael Semmes. You're not going to get clients like that if you say Wirtz did what he did because he was ordered by these guys to do it. I've ordered copies of many of the firm's files, but I haven't received them yet. Be interested to see what they turn up. So then added to this, the superior orders defense, if we are to believe that Connor gave them some money to keep the Wirtz trial from interfering with Davis's prosecution, it would just run counter to them, and they are a very profit-minded group of individuals. So in my mind, there were things to think about. I went through the trial record. I must have gone through it a dozen times by now. I don't see anything in it where Wirtz says, hey, I was only following orders. I was ordered to do that. This guy told me to do this. I got this document here that says shoot these people. None of that exists. So what did Wirtz say? Oh, by the way, he was convicted in Hunt. I don't think anybody was surprised. But what Wirtz said, and this is fascinating, this is part of his close. I'm here to answer for all my official and personal acts at Andersonville. And if I can convince this court that they have been void of offense before God and man, I trust I shall not be held responsible for the official and personal misdeeds of others. By my own acts, let me be judged, and if they have been such to warrant my conviction, let me be visited with punishment. And what makes it confusing is, even with something that clear, that's still on the National Park Service website. And it's because there's a number of books by well-regarded war crimes people that say exactly that. So basically, going through all this, like I said, there is no total ending. I can't figure it all out for myself, but there are very good reasons why this law firm would not have pursued a superior orders defense of Captain Wirtz. Okay. Altruistic marketing profits. He didn't plead or argue that he was ordered to do something. So the question is, really, what did he plead? But what I was looking more closely at is, why would these three high-power, high-connected attorneys take on his case? I've never seen anybody look at it. There's no documentation whatsoever. It just doesn't make sense. I guess that would be like, see, Amazon guy, Bill Gates. That'd be like, Bill Gates manning
Bezos.
huh?
Jeff Bezos.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, Gates, yeah. It'd be like Bezos running a kiosk at a county fair. It doesn't make sense. And so it comes down to, was it a way to drum up their business, but then they had to give that up when it looked like it was going to cause trouble with defending Jefferson Davis, which I think more people in the South cared about what would happen to than Henry Wirtz.